let's get started. So we have today on the schedule, we will be having a rather simple session about getting started with SpineOpt and installation verification and such. So it will be quite simple today, and then there will still be room for more questions. So that's why it's a bit of a quieter one. But still might be interesting to get to know how to do this, and I'll just go through it from start to finish with you. So feel free to follow along. And if there's at any point that you're struggling with something doesn't work like it does with me, then you can just interrupt me and then I'll see whether we can solve it on the fly. For next times, we will have our in-person event, so that if you have been able to register for that, I don't know whether it's still open. I don't think so, actually. But yeah, you can check. But the one then after that will be in June, and there we'll have our another webinar that will be again a bigger one, and then we'll talk about the Ines spec, which you have already seen in a previous session about the pan-European dataset that was at the very end. It came in there. So, but here we'll go into more detail and also show off the latest features in SpineOpt that I'm not entirely able to show today, but we'll see where we'll get. I also was hoping to get the new data structure with you, but I talked to the core developers and they said like, no, it needs a little bit more time in the oven. So I'm gonna respect that. We're gonna let them cook, and we'll have a little bit of an older version today, but should be mostly the same. When you upgrade, it will just be easier. So if today works out, then it will be even easier after that. And I'll show some of the differences as well. That being said, let's get started. So with this, this is our main page for the Spine Tools on GitHub, github.com/spinetools. And there we have the different projects. One of them is SpineOpt. If you go to the documentation there, and then you go to the installation, then this is one of the main things we'll be talking right now. And that's this entire installation process is like basically everything you see on the screen here. We are going to check our Python version, our Julia version. We are going to create a Python environment. We're going to install Spine Toolbox in that environment. Then we're going to create a Julia environment, and we're going to add SpineOpt to that environment. And then we can go to Spine Toolbox, make some settings there, and then we'll go over to using it a first time in a workflow. So getting started, what I do is I go to a folder, and I'm just using the downloads folder as like a working folder, but you should use any folder that you would like to have the Spine tools in. Maybe you have some restrictions by your administrator that you have to put your tools that you install this way somewhere else. That's something that we cannot really help you with. That's something that you have to then talk to your IT department with. But assume you have a location that you know where you can install Spine tools. I typically create like this kind of folder, just Spine tools, where I then always put all of my different projects. If you want an example of that, I have a lot of different Spine tools, but this one, for example, has all of the Ines tools as well as Spine Interface, SpineOpt, and Spine Toolbox. But depending on what you want to install and how you want to install it, your folder will look a bit different. But that's why I typically start from the Spine tools and then have multiple entries, even if there's not much else that we will be having there. Then we're gonna add some new folders. I typically also have an environments folder. just that. And I have a Spine files folder. So the environments folder is where I'll install Spine Toolbox and SpineOpt and such. And the Spine files folder is the folder where I put some Spine projects where those look like these things, right? So I put them typically there. So once we have this, then we should go into a terminal. Now, I am on Linux, so I will have a bash terminal, as you will see here. But you can do the same things in a Windows command terminal or in a PowerShell terminal. But if you do want it to look a bit more like mine, that you don't feel comfortable with too much difference, you can also use git bash. And git bash is if you have installed Git, you will be able to right-click in your folder and there will be something like git bash here or something like that. And then you will get a very similar terminal as me, and then you can do the exact same commands as me. But if you're on Windows, you'll have to change one command once I'm going, but I'll show you what that command will be. But most of it will be practically the same. So what we can see here is that I am in the downloads folder and I'm in the Spine Tools folder. If I then check what is in this folder, I can see the environments and the Spine files folder that I made before. So then I know that I'm in the correct folder. And now we can start like with the installation process. And the first thing you saw there was to check whether you actually have Python and what Python version you have. And the same with Julia. You can see which versions you have just to know whether everything is okay. It used to be that in Julia we would have different options, that we had a version that was not compatible with version 1.12, and then you could change that with Julia up. Sorry, I need to make that a bit more clear. So in the status you can see that I have two versions of Julia installed, the release version and the 1.11. But we'll just be using the latest version, so you don't need to look at this Julia up. Now for Python, I do have to say one thing. If by any chance you are on Linux, which you're probably not, but just in case, the version of Python that you have installed is like the system version. And there may be some tweaks by your operating system to that Python version, and that may cause issues when using Spine Toolbox. So what I did was I installed a different version of Python and I'll be using that one. But if you're on Windows, Python typically isn't on there by default, then you have a separate Python anyway, and then you will just use the Python command without the numbers. But I will be using the numbers because I want to play it safe. Okay, that's just about the Python and Julia versions. We still haven't done anything. So let's get started, and let's get started with installing Spine Toolbox. So as I said, use your Python version. I don't know what the M stands for, but it stands for something. I think it's for local or something instead of global, but it doesn't matter. The important part is that we are going to create a virtual environment. Why are we creating virtual environments? It's just if we have multiple tools that all use different Python packages, there may be some conflicts in these versions of Python packages. And so if you do every application in a different virtual environment, then each virtual environment will have its own versions of these packages and they won't conflict with each other. And that's why it's safer to create a virtual environment. And that's what I created the environments folder for. So all my environments are there, and I have to give that environment a name. Typically I go with penv, just it's a short for Python environment, but you could call it whatever you want. If you need something more meaningful, you can just make it Python environment, but I keep it short. And then it creates that Python environment, but it only has created it. It doesn't it's not active yet. So if we would look into our folders, we would now see that in our environments folder, we have this penv, which is our Python environment. But now we have to activate that one. And the way we do that, that is the only command that is different between Linux and Windows. I'll first do the Linux one just to show you what happens, and then I'll type in the Windows one so that you can type that one if you want to work with that one. So for Linux, it's source. Source means that we are going to read everything in the file that we are going to open now, and the file we want is in the environments folder, in the penv environment, in the bin folder. So if we look at this penv, we see that the Python environment has a lot of folders, and one is bin, and there is our file that we need. It's the activate file. Activate. So, and then we see here in the start this penv, which means that the Python environment is now active. So that means that everything we do now is within this environment and will then, so every package we add here is only in this Python environment. Now, how do we do it in Windows? The call is optional, but sometimes it works better. And then you also go to environments and to Python environment, but, oh, I'm making a mistake. Windows uses the other backslashes, because why not make it different? And instead of the bin file, they have a scripts file. And then you can, I have the wrong backslash. And then this is the equivalent line for Windows. So it's just, it's the same concept, but it just has some different ways of being called. And then that should give you also the same effect that you are now in a Python environment. Yeah. So instead of the bin folder, you have the scripts folder, and instead of the forward slashes, you have backslashes. Could also be that, yeah, in the first line that I did, you may also have needed the backslash, but yeah. Okay. That being said, we are now in our Python environment, and now installing Spine Toolbox is as simple as just installing it through pip. And then it will start installing it. You will see a lot of things going on the screen, but that's just installing all of the different Python packages inside of our Python environment. But if while we wait, we can just go back of what we did. It was really simple. We created a Python environment, we activated the Python environment, and we installed Spine Toolbox in the Python environment. It's as simple as that. And then we do exactly the same, but for SpineOpt. So, but therefore we're going into Julia. And in Julia, you see here we have version 1.12. You may have a different version 1.11, whatever. But here we are in 1.12. And to activate a Julia environment, we are going to use, how do I show that sign? If you let me just grab a small text. No, actually I can show it a bit easier, I think. I can just add a new terminal. So this bracket, that's the bracket we need. This bracket, if we put that here in the Julia terminal, we get to the package. And there you see in the front of it, I hope you can see it, and at version 1.12. And now here we also need to create the virtual environment. So again, we are going to And Julia does it a little bit different than Python. Julia creates and activates the environment at the same time. So that's why we just write activate instead of some other command. And we are going again to this environments, and there we add then Genv. Similar to the Python environment, here we then have the Julia environment, but again, you can call this whatever you want. And once you do that, then it activates this, and you will now see in front of this that we are in the Genv environment, so the Julia environment. And in this one, we can simply add Spinopt, like you would add any other package. And there it will also just get started with installing Spinopt. Maybe it goes a bit faster for me because I've installed a lot of things hundreds of times. So I don't know how fast this is for you, but for me, it's already done. And yeah, we can look at the status and we can see that Spinopt has been installed. It's quite important that this is like the version 11, but I don't think you need to do anything about this because this is the only version of Spinopt that is compatible with the version 1.12 of Julia. If you have any other version of any previous version of Spinopt, then you should be using Julia 1.11 or something. But okay, that's a detail. Oh, okay, so I deleted the back square and now I'm back into Julia, and to exit Julia, I write the exit command. And then we're still in that Python environment. And that's also important. Every time you want to run the Spine toolbox, you'll have to be in the Python environment. So every time you need to have this before you run the Spine toolbox command. But yeah, as a quick summary again, we created an environment, Python environment. We activated that environment. We installed Spine Toolbox. We opened Julia. We created and activated the Julia environment. We added Spinopt. And now we basically have everything installed. So if we now have run this command Spine Toolbox inside of the Python environment, then it should start up Spine Toolbox. I have here the light theme with the colored icons, and you can change that however you like inside of this the settings. We will also need to go to the settings because while we have installed everything, we have not configured everything, and that's also a very important step. In the settings, we have the general stuff, and as I mentioned, we can color the toolbar icons or not. I do like the light theme, but I don't like the gray icons, so I like the combination of the light theme with the colored items. But yeah, you have other options as well. You can have fun playing around with that, however you want. But we are going to do the important stuff, and that is the settings of the tools. And there we see Julia and Python, and it's important that these point to the same Python and Julia environment that we have made before. Here you see the Python one is grayed out because that's automatically correct when we run it inside of this Python environment. Then this will be correct regardless. I want to have this in the background and I want to show this. Okay. For Julia, it's often not correct. If you have a lot of, every installation is a bit different and often it is not, yeah. It also doesn't help that Spine Toolbox remembers the settings globally. So if you have multiple versions of Spine Toolbox, then you will have sometimes need to switch between the different Julia environments if you switch between those Spine Toolboxes. But okay, how many people have multiple versions? Can't have enough versions, right? So you see here, for example, that I have the Julia environment 11, which was a test that I did a while ago. So I have to change this to the correct one. It's already opened in the correct folder, but it could be that you open somewhere else, but you go to your Spine Tools folders, you go to your environments folder, and then you go to the Gen folder, Julia environment that you created, and you select that one. And then it will be there, and then you say OK. And then the settings are OK. But if you want to use SpineOpt, you may still have to install a plugin. Now, SpineOpt is not an option for me here anymore because I already have SpineOpt installed, the plugin. And as I mentioned, these settings are a bit global, so it doesn't matter whether I installed this from scratch. I installed it a while ago, and I still have this SpineOpt plugin somewhere else. So I still have that one, but you could install it from here. Then we have basically everything to get started, but it is very important to verify whether everything actually works, because there are so many things that can go wrong during that installation, even though it's only like 5 lines of code, like we saw in this installation picture. It's only a handful of code. There can still be some issues. So what we are going to do is we're going to create a new project to check whether whether everything works actually. And what we'll do is we'll create a new project. And as I mentioned before, I'll create one in the Spine files. I'll create a new folder called live demo. Could be any other name, but you could have multiple projects here then. And in this live demo, I'm gonna open that one. And now I have a project that is open and I can start playing around. What we'll be needing for this verification, we are going to need some data. I call it input. I also need one for the output. And then I also need a run SpineOpt tool. Now you see these exclamation marks, and that means that they are not really initialized yet. So if we select one of them, we can go to the properties. So you see here the data store properties for the input file. And we can either point to an existing database or we can create a new one. And you see here the new SpineDB button. I'll click that one. It will give me a suggestion of what name of the store of the database and what location. And if you look at the location, it's in the Spine Tools folder, in my Spine Files folder, in my live demo project, and then in the project files of that project. And inside of the items that is collected for the input database that I have. So I'm happy with all of this, and I'm also happy with the name, that the name corresponds to the item. It's fine. So I can just save that. And then we have initialized the first one. Now we're going to initialize the second one the same way. So again, selecting it, going to the properties, and then create a new Spine database. We look at the path, we look at the name. It's all good for me. And then we have them initialized. Then we can connect them, and we connect input to the tool and then the output here. But these connections, it's very important to know that these are the available resources. You can see here when I click the tool, I can look at the properties, and in the properties you see that they are the available resources. But it does not mean that the tool is already using them. So what I do is I select them and I drag them to the tool arguments, because that is then now we say it's not only available, it's also actually what we want to use. There are a few ways to do it. I just copied them and selected them, but I can also I can delete them here on the right. I can also select them and push this button here, and then they will also be there. So there are a few different ways you can put them there, but the important thing is that you actually put them there. And what you would want to do in this input database is to, well, create a SpineOpt database, because this is the generic Spine database, but every tool may expect a very specific format. So you may want to load a template, and in this case, the SpineOpt plugin also gives us a template for the input. And there it's the same thing. We select it, we see what's the available resources, but we need to put them in the tool arguments. And then we still have selected it, and we can run this part. So you, at the top, you see execute, we have project or selection. I'm gonna run the selection. And in this selection, it will then start running this tool. The fact that it runs this tool is already a very good indication that our installation was a success, but still we are going to go a bit further with checking. And what you see here then in this DB editor, we can edit the database, and you can see that the template is here. The other one, we didn't add the template, and it was just empty, and we could add a lot of stuff of our own, but it's a bit easier if you start from something that already exists. And we could start adding units, creating a small energy system and trying to optimize that one. However, for the verification, I don't recommend doing that. I recommend first loading in an existing tool that you know already works, because that's one, then you can actually check whether your installation is correct. Otherwise, you may be thinking like, oh, why doesn't this work? And I don't get the results I expect, and it could be an error in your installation and you wouldn't even know about it. To avoid that, it's best to check it. So what we do is then we import, and then we have to look for a file. We don't have that file yet, so actually we have to download that first. So I'm going back to the SpineOpt repository, and I'm going back to the Spine Tools GitHub. There we have SpineOpt. So a while ago we went to the documentation, but now we're actually going to the repository. And there we go to the version that we installed. So at the right, we see here the releases. And it is important that we are in the correct release. So we had version 11, if you remember. So that's also the version that we are going to need. So we're going to look for the tags. We see version 11 is there. So we click that one. And then we see that we are in SpineOpt in that version. We can then go to the examples. And in that example, we're just going to get the simple system one. And we can download that file. It's on the right, there's a download button. This download is, well, probably in my downloads folder. So what I typically do is I take that one and I paste it inside of the project folder. So we had, again, the Spine tools. We had the Spine files where I hold my projects. We have the live demo where we're right now. And I just add the file there. Then it's wherever I can find it easily back then. That having download, we can then go back to our editor, and then we can import the file that we just downloaded, which is this simple system. And if we look at that one, well, I'm gonna delete this stuff. I'm not gonna need it at the moment, at least. Yeah, we go. So if we look at this one, then we see the system that was in that file that we imported. So it has the model structure with the stochastic structure and the temporal structure. And we have the physical network with 2 nodes and 2 power plants. So yeah, fuel node, electricity node, power plant. But we'll get back to that. If at any point you want to save this, then there's no save button, but there's a commit button, because we are talking about databases with versions and with additions and changes. It's more appropriate to use like a commit feature. And you can then say what you changed, but we just added this database. With that, we can then go back to our project, and now we can actually test whether everything is installed correctly. So we have here Spinopt, we have the input, and now we can run Spinopt. So I select Spinopt and I run selection. And now it will take some time to run. We are working a bit more on the performance side, so it will get faster every time. But for now, it still takes a little while. That gives us the chance to look a bit more at what is in this database. So I mentioned before, we had on one hand everything related to like the configuration of the model, like how you are going to do your optimization. The default values is what we use here. What we can see, if we make this a little bigger, yeah, we don't need to report. We have sufficient in this. You see here a table, that's where our parameters will be if we would have any. But in these tabs below, you can get more information. So with the parameter definition, that's where all of the parameters are that you could add into this parameter value. So this parameter definition shows that what would be the big M value, what would be the solver, the linear solver, the MIP solver, and there's always some kind of explanation of what that parameter does to help you. The discount rate, discount year, all of that stuff. The model end and the model start, I think. Yeah, so it's basically 1 day by default, but you could change that by, yeah, changing that value. And that holds for like every other one as well. Here we have a temporal block that has a resolution of 1 day. So we had a model horizon of 1 day and we have a resolution of 1 day, which just means that we are calculating like one value. And we could have a stochastic structure with different scenarios. But here it's just deterministic. And then we could, so in a basic configuration is that, and then there are some tutorials on how you can do more complex stuff with multiple temporal blocks, with multiple scenarios, and with different features for this model. Now I hear that my fan stopped blowing, so we can probably check whether it's done. I will get back to this, but I just want to check whether it's working to be sure. Well, we have a green check mark, that's already good. And we also see a lot of information here. If you go from the start, it was first saying like what variables it was creating, the constraints, and then once it has built the model, it was solving the model, and we got to an optimal value. So with that, we are now confident that our installation is correct, and now we can actually do stuff with that. If you encounter any problems here, then that means that there is a high chance that there is an issue with your installation and that you need to revisit one of the previous steps. But going back then to this, we have like this very simple system where we have a fuel node. If we look at that fuel node, it's if you look at this balance type, it says balance type none. That means that this node is able to generate energy or power, and it just means that it's like some kind of import or whatever it could be. Yeah, it's just there can be a flow here, and that's why it's the fuel node. It's the fuel that goes into these two power plants. Here we have the electricity node. There we have the node type is balanced. And we see the balance type by default is balance type node, which is then that it is balanced. So it cannot generate energy. It needs to get its energy from somewhere else. And it also has a demand of this one flat value, but we could edit this and we could create a time series that we say either with a fixed resolution or a variable resolution. With the fixed resolution, we can just then for that 1 day, because we only have 1 day in our thing, we could then list a lot of values, etc. We could also create a map where the key corresponds to the scenarios that we have. If we look here, we only have the realization scenario, so there's not much point in creating this one, but you could. But we keep it here at the plain value, because there's no particular reason to go a bit deeper in it at the moment. And then there's all of this in the middle. So let's address that for a bit. So we have the units and the nodes we already had. And we need to supply the demand, and we need these two power plants for that. And what these wires are there because we want these units to be flexible. It's not just a gas power plant. It could be like anything. It could be a cogeneration plant. It could be a heat pump, whatever. And to be able then to define these, well, we can have the common properties are typically inside of this ones, but there are none here. But then the ones specific to the flow are then in these connections between the units and the nodes. So from the fuel node, everything that goes through this flow has a variable operation and maintenance cost of 50. And that's then defined at the fuel. So any fuel that needs to go through here will have to pay the price. And we also have the capacity in this one, that any flow going through this has a maximum capacity of 200. But if you would have multiple flows, then you could have different capacities for each of those flows. And that's the reason why it is inside of these flows instead of at the level of the unit, because then it would be difficult to say something about that flow. And that's then also the same thing for this complicated one, which is between two units and a node. And this one will dictate how these two flows relate to each other. So you have here the complicated name fixed ratio out in unit flow as a parameter, but it's basically the efficiency. But it has this complicated name because there are different inflows and outflows, and so you can define them differently. But the principle is the same. It's basically how these flows are related to each other. If this one is not there, then these two flows are not bound to each other, and it will generate results that you don't expect. But if you want it to be like act as an efficiency from the input to the output, well, then you have to add it. And in this case, it's 80%. This is one of the things that looks complicated at first, but is actually quite reasonable once you start thinking about, what if I have multiple flows? Then I know how to define them. Like I need where do I need costs, where do I need capacities, and I can assign them to the flows directly, and I can relate to them with this kind of relation. Now, this one will be a bit simpler in the next version, because instead of doing that between node, node, and unit, we will just do it between flow and flow, which is a lot more direct and a lot easier to understand. But the principle remains exactly the same. It's just a way to connect these two flows together. And I think that is one of the most difficult things to understand once you start with SpineOpt. But if you understand that, then it's yeah, you're good to go. One other thing that may be confusing is the difference between the scenario that is here on the right-hand side and the scenario that is here inside of SpineOpt. So these alternatives and scenarios, we've seen them in one of the previous webinars, that we could have different alternatives, and those alternatives would then give you a means to change values for different alternatives, and you can combine them in a scenario, and then you can run a specific scenario which will then automatically have the correct data. That's just running one optimization model of SpineOpt. If you want your scenarios inside of your optimization problem, that is when you're going to look at these stochastic scenarios and this stochastic structure of SpineOpt. And then you will define these different scenarios, for example, high demand and low demand, and you want your investment to be robust for both of those scenarios. So that's why you build it inside of SpineOpt. You create those two scenarios, and you create then this low and high demand with the map as shown before, instead of the alternatives from here, because that's just the difference is running SpineOpt at different times with different values, or running SpineOpt once with scenarios built in for more like robust investments, for example. So those are the two main confusing things: the scenario definitions and the way to define an efficiency between two flows of one power plant. With that, I have covered the basics. Don't forget to save the project. And I think I'll open the floor for questions here, because I can talk a lot more about what you could do inside of SpineOpt, or I could talk about how you can create more special versions of Spine tools. Let's say that I want a developer version, then I would clone the Git project, and then inside of Julia, I would install the developer version. So then I would activate, and I would do dev, and then it would, after you cloned SpineOpt, you would have like spineopt.jl/dot, and then you can use that version instead. So I could talk about all of those kind of things, but let's hear it from you. If you have a specific question about what we just said, about something else, or whether you want to see such an advanced installation or SpineOpt feature, yeah, I'm opening the floor to you. Going once, going twice. Okay, I'm assuming then that it's pretty clear and that you have learned something and that everything worked out perfectly from the start. And we will put this video online if you missed anything at some point, so you can then follow along there and then perhaps ask some questions later, perhaps in another webinar or at some other point. So yeah, I think it doesn't really make sense for me to just continue rambling about this advanced installation and stuff and such. Maybe I'll do that some other time, but for now, I thank you for being here. Hope to see you in the in-person event in Riga or the next webinar in June about the Ines spec. Maybe I'm not there, but you will definitely still be in very good hands. And I do see one question. Can you be a bit more specific about constraint optimization? Because yeah, we do have a lot of constraints, of course, in our optimization, but and we even have user constraints. It's a bit limited sometimes, but also very powerful at the same time. So but that's a very advanced feature, but it's we have linear constraints, we have mixed integer constraints, and a lot of them you can just activate or deactivate just by using certain data in there. So sometimes you may want ramping, sometimes you don't, and then just by having the adding the parameters for it, then you can have it, yeah, be included in the model generation or not. So it should be very flexible. It should cover a lot of things. It doesn't cover everything because it's mostly targeted towards operation and planning. But we have seen spine tools to be used in very creative ways. So yeah, I'd say go wild and see whether the things work out. And yeah, I'll hear about these things. Yeah, if there are any more questions, you can still ask them, of course. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that that's for another time. So I thank you all for being here and hope to see you in the next one. Ciao.